brother just told me. Jay, why are we laughing so much? How many years, John?
I started teaching Hamlet when Lyndon Johnson was president.
And she says, I met the youthful Lord Paris at Lawrence's cell and gave him what becoming love I might, not overstepping the bounds of modesty.
No, I already did that with the other
I should
guy.
say that.
Him and Beowulf and...
But you know, when he dies, he's like desperate to be remembered. Tell my story. Remember me. Should we be doing this? Should we stop right now?
No.
No. Go ahead. I didn't do it. Sorry, I didn't confirm that.
No,
yeah, let's go.
I'm always ready.
Okay.
And this is one of my favorite poems. I know it by heart. It's short, and it's a Yeats poem. And it's my favorite poem from the perspective of a poor person. And the heart of it isn't really what Odysseus is thinking right now. So it's only pertinent insofar as Odysseus is in disguise as a beggar, and he's interacting with slaves.
Yeah.
This is from the perspective of a young man who's in love with a girl, and so the perspective is different. I just love the poem, so selfishly I'm going to read it. It's called "He Wishes for the Cloths of Heaven." Had I the heavens embroidered cloths enwrought with golden and silver light, the blue and the dim and the dark cloths of night and light and the half-light, I would spread the cloths under your feet. But I, being poor, have only my dreams. I've spread my dreams under your feet. Tread softly, because you tread on my dreams. That's it. Simple, Paul, you know?
I like it. William Butler Yeats.
Oh, yeah, you can't go
The
wrong.
Cloths of Heaven.
Can't go wrong.
That's a nice poem to open up with.
Yeah.
And we're opening back up with Paul and Jay with Teacher Talk and continuing on through the Odyssey in Book 17. And I don't know, are they dreams? The men who have invaded Odysseus's house, I think they've trampled on his world, on his creation, on his home, his manor, his family, his livelihood, and also his dignity, I think, at some level. And so he's here, he's back to take it back. So last episode, book 16, Odysseus made himself known. He's back on the island. Telemachus back on the island. We've noted the clever plot threads of pushing these two characters back together. And we're moving on to book 17, which is an awesome book. Has a lot of great things in it. So Homer is carefully moving down the path, working toward a massive confrontation, which you just know if you don't know the story at all. You just know, you can feel it, that it's coming. And so we move further down that path toward the confrontation in book 17 today. What's the Emily Wilson translation chapter title for book 17?
Oh, let me look. If I was a good teacher, I'd be prepared for questions like that. It's good. It's Insults and Abuse, which is also the title of my period B freshman English class. So
Insults and abuse. Got not stop, huh? Yeah. Well, I hope that's going both ways, Jay. You don't just take it. You know, you got to give it back. They respect you for it.
Otherwise, it's bullying if it doesn't go. And God knows I would never. I want to put out there, if it's okay, before.
Yeah.
The night before we look at book 17, I would probably, with my students, read book 17 aloud in the room. But the night before, I'd have them do some writing. And the writing would ask them, we would list the main characters on the board, like Odysseus, Telemachus, Eumaeus, Antinous, Penelope, maybe.
Yeah.
And I would have them write some sentences about what they think each one right now in the Odyssey wants the most.
Yeah.
And
so that's who, what each wants. You're talking about Telemachus, Penelope, Odysseus.
Yeah.
Eumaeus. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And it's more nuanced than like Odysseus wants to go home. He's home. So, you know, I think to me, the big thing in this chapter is the deceptive. There's so many moments where Odysseus is one choice away or one person's reaction away from his whole life falling apart and him getting killed
Yes.
or imprisoned or whatever. This is one of those deceptively dangerous paragraphs, but I think we only know that if we elucidate in advance what these characters want most desperately. Odysseus is home, so he doesn't want to go home. He's home.
Right.
He wants to maintain safety until he can figure out a plan to eliminate 108 guys with hardly any legitimate help.
Yeah.
And if he's outed now as Odysseus, the Iliad and the Odyssey are meaningless, or the Odyssey is.
Yeah, that's right.
So,
and he only has essentially conscripts and to help him, and they're not trained. They're eager. They're on board. They have a lot more energy about the fight than, say, Mike Tyson had the other night against Jake Paul, I'll say.
I have lots of thoughts about that, but we'll do that offline.
They at least want to win. I mean, Odysseus at least wants to win. I'm not sure about that fight. But they're not, the guys who are going to be fighting with them are not super capable. I like that exercise also because I could see you just letting it go, but you could also wind it to where it culminates in what does Odysseus want? And that's kind of the toughest one. And as always, he's so wily. It's tough. He's tough to follow, even in this book. I notice, even in this chapter, book 17, Telemachus is kind of unpolitical. And Penelope is as well, though she's smart. But Odysseus, at every turn, every time he shows up in this book, he is still on. He's still relentlessly plotting. And so you're asking why? Why is he so controlled? Why is he? What is he protecting? Right. What does he think is going to go wrong? What does he? Well, as you say, what does he want, and how does he think he's going to get it? So I think that's a good prep exercise. And I would also agree to getting the class to read the chapter. And if we can just pause on that for a second, that is enormous. And it can fall by the wayside, I think, for English teachers, because we think, oh, of course we're going to read, and we read. But it's just not, of course. Students have always found ways to not read. And every generation of teachers has said this, but I think it's actually true now more than ever, and they have so many more ways, so many more distractions ready to hand, and many more ways to get away with not reading. So I think doubling down, which also will cost you time, time in the classroom, because it probably means giving time over to it in the classroom to get students to actually read the chapter, is transformative. And so it just has to happen. But before digging into a good conversation of this, a clear, solid layer of just reading the chapter is well worth whatever time or resources, scant as they are, that you put toward it. So I do that. So I want to do our normal questions, our obvious and essential, subtle, but crucial, and then any lingering questions or lingering sort of awe from this chapter. The plot in general is not, I'm trying to think if anything really surprising comes up. Nothing too much. We just get down to the title of the chapter in the Fitzgerald translation is Beggar at the Manor. We finally get the beggar to come down to the manor. It's not a beggar, it's Odysseus. So Telemachus goes down to the manor, the main house, back to his house, to let his mother see him. He says she's been told, Piraeus, I think, informed her that Telemachus is back, but Telemachus knows his mom wants to see him. And then Telemachus says, Eumaeus, you take that beggar. As a reminder, Telemachus knows who that beggar is now, is his father, but Eumaeus doesn't. And he asks Eumaeus to bring the beggar down to the manor house, where he'll have better luck for begging, likely to get more food, drink, whatever, down there. Although, they warn him it's kind of a mess. So Telemachus goes down on his own, comes in, talks to his mom, and admirably for Homer, briefly retells his trip to sea there and back again, which actually it's a very nice summary of a couple chapters. More than a couple chapters, and it's short, so it's well told. He tells his mom briefly exactly what happens, and then the plot shifts over to Odysseus and Eumaeus. They make their way down. They have some bad encounter on their way down to the manor. They get there, and then Odysseus, in his conniving way, does something that looks like apparently just straightforward and simple, but it's actually quite devious. And he has his first encounters in his own house again with these suitors, these men who are taking over his place, and he allows them to show themselves. Penelope shows herself as well. I think she begins to come out of the background and show herself to be the character that she is, with all the things she's capable of. Athena shows up again in this chapter. She's in the house too, and I think that's basically it for the plot. That's what happened. So essentially, we get Odysseus from the woods with Eumaeus down to the manor house. Get him situated there amongst really his wife Eumaeus and the suitors. And I guess the last dramatic point is that Penelope sees the beggar in the house and asks Eumaeus to bring him up so she can talk to him. She feels pity for him, wants to have that conversation to see, what have you heard out in the world? What do you know? And Odysseus has to be careful. He's afraid she might recognize him, so he puts her off cleverly. And that's kind of it. Eumaeus goes back to the woods to watch after his swine, and scene closes.
No, that's good.
I think that's kind of it's kind of a long chapter, but that's pretty much all that happens, and it closes on the suitors eating, drinking, dancing, playing in Odysseus's house.
All right, so good night, Paul. That was good. Good talking to you. No,
it's done. Bye now.
Questions, everybody.
All right, but let's go back at the top then and start. Jay, why don't you give us what do you have as your obvious and essential? This is core to this chapter. Don't miss it. What do you land on there?
Yeah, I think in discussing this chapter with students for the first time, who are reading it for the first time, I think dramatic context, setting the dramatic context just on a literal way, and then recreating what must be in Odysseus's mind and heart right now is really important. I just started Hamlet, and I said the same thing today to my seniors, that yes, it's a play full of famous quotations. Yes, there's these really fancy speeches, but let's keep it human, and Odysseus right now is home for the first time in 20 years.
Yeah.
He has not seen his wife in 20 years. He's just revealed himself to his son, but he waited till the right time. He's seeing his property being misused by a bunch of slimy kids from the generation after the generation that's died along with him.
Yep.
One can only imagine what he wants to do and say right now. And I think it's really important when we think about him as a man to imagine the restraint necessary to do nothing.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, this is 417 in the Wilson, but this is him in disguise talking to just the slime bag Antinous, who I'm sure has the most punchable face in all of Ithaca. He says to Antinous, and I want to read this because of what Antinous says right after. This is Odysseus in disguise to Antinous. Friend, which is funny, give me something. You must be the best of all the Greeks. You look like royalty, so you should give more food than all the rest, and I will make you known throughout the world. I used to be a rich man with a palace, and I always have my students in this chapter mark dramatic irony because it's everywhere. When needy beggars come from anywhere, no matter who they were, I gave them food. My slaves were numberless. My wealth was great. That's true. I had the life men say is happiness. Zeus destroyed it all. He wanted to. He prompted me to travel with some pirates to Egypt. That long journey spelled my ruin. I moored my galleys in the river Nile and told my loyal men to stay and guard them, and sent out scouts to all the lookout points. But they were too impulsive, and they sacked the beautiful Egyptian fields and seized women and children, and they killed the men. So Odysseus cleverly is telling his own story and replacing some names and places.
Yeah.
Screaming reached the town. The people heard and rushed to come to help. At dawn, the plain was all filled up with foot soldiers and horses and flashing bronze. Then Zeus, who loves the thunder, caused panic in my men, disastrous panic. Danger was all around us, and not one stood firm. The sharp bronze swords killed many men, and others were enslaved as laborers, but they gave me to somebody they met, a foreigner named Demeter, king of Cyprus. I came from there. Such is my tale of woe. So Odysseus does Antinous the honor of at least inventing this long autobiography. The son of his child. Watch Antinous' response. Antinous replied, "What god imposed this pest to spoil our feast?" Complete dismissiveness. Doesn't acknowledge anything he just said. Stay over there, not near my table. And Odysseus says in the next speech, next stanza, "You handsome idiot.
Yeah.
You would not give a grain of salt from your own house. You sit enjoying somebody else's food." He's this close to revealing himself, right?
Yeah.
Antinous throws his stool at Odysseus, and the men respond, sort of chastising Antinous that he hit this old beggar. So you have like that idea of hospitality and Xenia happening, of all this dripping with dramatic irony. But I think instead of focusing on literary terms, what sort of person can do this, can keep his stuff together while this is being said to him by this man in his own house where he hasn't been for 20 years? Like, think of what that says about Odysseus. It's extraordinary, I think.
That is a great point. I think of the scene as a plot point that is fun because of the irony, as you point out, and the razor's edge that Odysseus is walking on. How does he know it's not Antinous' house and that he's eating someone else's food?
Right.
I mean, maybe he just picks that up, but even if there's an explanation for it, it's close, as you say, to him, revealing that he knows more than he should. Well, Eumaeus even remarks on it earlier, that Odysseus says, "Oh, here's the king's house." Eumaeus says something like, "Oh, you're a quick study. How'd you figure that out?" Well, anyway, so yeah, he plays that edge, but instead of it just being a plot point that has tension and irony in it, see it as a character point, as a dramatic and intense way of getting Odysseus's character on the page. Because yes, when you ask that question, what does it take? What does it take? This kind of restraint. It's fantastic. He's a fantastic character.
What's your obvious point, Paul?
I like it. Yeah, my obvious. I would like to focus on for this obvious is that Ithaca is in bad shape. And if I had to put it in a single phrase, that's how I would put it. Here's it kind of goes with the dramatic context you're talking about. But instead of focusing on Odysseus's character, I want to focus on the setting, essentially, which is also important. That this place that Odysseus comes back to is a white hot mess. It's a wreck, and knowing that, focusing on that to set the context for what's coming, and for what has been. It gives a context for everything that has been. Say the first half of the book is like a drama, or like an adventure, and there's all these adventure stories and fighting and outsmarting and nearly dying and suffering and pleasures and all these things. You can read it like an adventure story, okay, but what you read in this book, in book 17, puts all that in the context, that it's just that all of that came at awful loss, awful cost. And you can see it significantly probably in two scenes. One is in that walk when Eumaeus takes the beggar / Odysseus down to his house to beg. On the way, they run into a cattle herd. And this cattle herd, this is a first person, that Odysseus runs into after Eumaeus, if you don't count the Athena embodiment. And Telemachus, this is the first, like mixing back with the locals. It's like going out to the grocery store when you just moved into town in a new place. What are people like around you? You sort of take them in at the post office, the grocery store, or whatever. And if you got punched in the face and cursed out in that first trip out, this would be really depressing. And that's what happens to him. They stop by a spring to get water, and there's Melantho, the cattle herd, and he just goes after him. Look at this filthy beggar! What are you doing out here? And Eumaeus, look at you, a swineherd bringing more swine. That's all you do, you people. And then he berates him for being poor, for not having anything. He says, "Oh, if I got my hands on you, I'd give you a job. Finally, you could work. I bet you're just lazy. That's why That's why you're so poor, desperate, and hungry. And then he kicks him, tries to kicks him off the road. So he treats him horribly, and then the cattle herd just scampers right down to the manor house and finds his place among the other suitors and gets some food, and worms his way in for some free food. So this is a terrible. This makes Ithaca look awful. It's just an awful place. It's a bad advertisement for vacationing in Ithaca. When you have that experience, that's number one. Number two is one of the really, I think, the more famous scenes from the book, and that's the scene of it's the most pathetic, just about the most pathetic scene in the book, where Odysseus runs into his dog. Yeah. I mean, this scene could almost bring a tear. I don't want to overstate it, but it can almost bring a tear to your eye. But it is like a perfect literary device of a part standing in for the whole. It's kind of like synecdoche, that way of replacing. And I think Argos, the dog, is a replacement for Telemachus. The scene is when Odysseus comes down to the manor, he looks over and he's talking, and there's this dog that's ancient and nearly dead, lying on a heap of dung. And its little ear, it's almost in death. It's covered in maggots and flies, perks up because it hears a voice it recognizes from 20 years ago. And lo and behold, this is Odysseus' dog. And then Odysseus sees the dog Argos and says, "Whoa, I can't believe," he has to stay in character, "I wonder who would let a dog, look at him. It looks like he's a fine setup dog. Who would leave a dog there to just rot and die? That's awful." And then Eumaeus gives him the background. "Oh yeah, he was a great dog. He was a great hunter. Head of the pack, was awesome. But, nobody was here. No one was here to take care of him. So they just let him go. And look, all that potential, all that greatness at the level of a dog is there just literally left to rot." And so it's a little picture. It's a little picture of Ithaca. And in a way, it's a little picture of Telemachus, because Odysseus was not there. And thankfully, Telemachus isn't nearly dead and rotting. But all that time that's passed just cannot be gotten back. So this resolution we're going to get is going to be nice, and there'll be some setting things right, and there'll be some justice. But Argos can't turn back the clock. He's gone, and it gives you a picture of that you can play out in Odysseus's other relationships with Telemachus, with Penelope, with his, with Ithaca itself. It's just loss. And so there's a really sad moment of it there with Argos. And then he hears Odysseus' voice, and then, I don't know, Odysseus pats him or something, and then the dog rolls over and dies. It's just dead.
I have to say too, I was thinking of that passage as well. If I could just jump in really quickly.
Please do, yeah.
Totally what you're saying. And I was also thinking it's another level of, I don't know, I'm guessing you've had dogs or grew up with dogs or whatever.
Yeah, we got one right now, yeah.
When you love it, imagine being away from it for that long. I don't know, like my mother always would joke that when people say, like, "Geez, you treat dogs better than people sometimes," and she would say, like, "Well, some dogs are better than a lot of people." Like,
yeah,
just act. I don't know, like if I was away from a childhood dog on a little vacation, I would hug it when I got home.
Oh yeah,
it's another example of what would Odysseus want to do seeing the dog? Clean it up, hug it, take care, and he doesn't.
Yeah.
So it's another example of him keeping his stuff together in order to stay safe, to do the most important thing, not the impulsive thing he wants to do that his feelings are directing him to do.
Yeah. And there's so much. Of that. It's great because there's so much to clean up. There's so much to do. But for objectively laying out the loss, for objectively laying out how bad these people are, just let stuff go to waste, just leaving it out to rot and waste away. Who would do that? What kind of people have that, that are that kind of careless, and that kind of unconcerned? And Eumaeus kind of says it a little bit. He gives a little speech about slavery. He has that nice line in there that says, a man loses half his humanity when he becomes a slave. And you know how slaves are when the master's not around, because they're not there to direct them and to keep them on task. But I think it's a subtle little remark about slavery, which is that it makes you, one of what maybe is deeply spiritually awful about it is that it causes you to lose your own self-mastery. Eumaeus seems to be saying you're no longer director of your own soul, and so some deep part of your soul gets broken or taken away, and you sit around waiting for orders, and that's not human. That's not how people are made.
It's an interesting chapter. I mean, you have, and I'm going to mention this soon, but Theoclemenus interrupts Telemachus early on when talking to Penelope, and you'd think like, all right, we're in danger, like he's going to reveal too much. Then you have Melanthius, the see the swineherd?
The cattle.
Right?
The cattle
herd. So I mean, he says and does things to Odysseus in disguise that would make normal people react. As does Antinous. And then you have the Argos moment. This is a book full of moments that would break most people who are trying to hold their stuff together. In terms of like the subtle point, I just wanted to, Theoclemenus to me is one of the most weird, fascinating characters in all of Homer.
Oh yeah.
Because he comes out of nowhere. And he's just that sort of wonderful wild card. Like he's a murderer.
Exactly it.
He's a murderer. He's on the run, and he's a prophet, and he's just like a mix of kind of amazing things that like you probably wouldn't want to meet him, but you definitely want him in a story you're writing. Like he's great. So you know, like his dad, Telemachus tells his mom a very carefully curated story. And Theoclemenus, I have it in the Wilson at 152, says, now she has no idea who the hell this guy is, by the way. Random guy with my son. My lady. So he's smart enough to introduce, with his speech, he's smart enough to acknowledge her title. And that kind of, we see this with Beowulf when he shows up in Denmark. Like, you say certain things in a certain way and it opens doors for you, right? My lady, wife of great Odysseus, Theoclemenus says, this is 152 in the Wilson. This news is incomplete. It's almost like when you're with your buddies and you think you're out of trouble and then your friend keeps talking to your mom. It's like, oh God. Shut up to me.
Shut
up. Out of the woods.
I
will reveal the whole truth with a prophecy. I swear by Zeus and Xenia and hospitality and by the hearth of great Odysseus. I find those three things interesting. He's swearing by Zeus, self-evident, by Zeus's great code of Xenia, and the home we're in now, which is her home with the guy that she misses. So it's like heaven, what heaven inspires of us, and the seat of our stability. I'm swearing by all those things. The place where I've come, he's already here in Ithaca. Odysseus is already here at rest or on his way. He must have learned what bad things they're doing, and he's plotting ruin for them all. I know because I saw a sign while sitting on board the ship. I told Telemachus. And Penelope, because this is a family trait, is suspicious of good news. It reminds me of like growing up in New England. There's a certain like crusty New England vibe. I grew up working at a little municipal public golf course, and you'd have these retirees, and it would be like a perfect 75-degree sunny July day. You say, John, isn't this a beautiful day? And the New England old guy says, yeah, not going to get many more of these. Like, that's the response, you know? So that's Odysseus. We've seen Telemachus do that. So Theoclemenus says, Odysseus is here. He's here right now. And Penelope says, well, stranger, I hope this does come true. That's her response. I'll reward you, et cetera, et cetera. So again, what's fascinating is even though she's not related to Odysseus, she hasn't been through war literally. I think Homer is the first person in Western literature to acknowledge that if you have a loved one serving in war for a long time, you are doing your own version of service. As our grandparents' generation knew, Paul, our grandmothers who were home, they were serving in their own way, Paul. They were holding everything together.
That's right.
In a world where holding things together solo was not necessarily an easy thing. So Homer is very prescient. Like, I think he gets that. So here you have this woman, she hasn't fought a day, literally.
Right.
But her hardship leads her to not believe good news in the way that Odysseus's hardship leads him not to believe good news.
That's a beautiful parallel. And
You know?
and it's mentioned, people have taken advantage of that. So if she does learn through hardship and probably through some costly mistakes, not to costly to her own heart, probably to her own
Yeah.
psyche, not to take all of these positive stories as positive. I mean, I think it's kind of intimated that Odysseus's mother killed herself since she died of a broken heart, maybe
Broken
from
heart.
from some of this drama, this drama of people bringing messages and they're just not coming true.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're right. It is something she has had to fight against and fight back. Yeah, that's a good one. I noticed Telemachus leaves out the part about Theoclymenus being a murderer. I don't think he mentioned that to his
Well,
mom.
I don't think mom needs to know. Can I just share a very quick story?
Yeah.
It doesn't involve me being a murderer.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
I went to graduate school at Catholic University in DC, and it
Yeah.
was awesome. But off campus is very dangerous. There was a lot of gang violence at the time, and
Right.
crack, and like it was pretty bad. And there was a really great pub down the hill. But if you were to go there, you'd need to go in a larger group so you'd be safe. And then once
Yeah.
you were there, you'd talk about class, have a beer, appetizers, whatever. Well, when my dad visited for work meetings twice during my 2 years there, I would take him with my buddies and hang out. My dad was cool. We'd hang out.
Yeah.
So a week or two after I graduated, in Salem, Mass, in my house with my parents, and on the national news, it said there's a double murder in the Colonel Brooks pub parking lot.
Oh,
And my father and I are on. I swear to you, my mother looks over and looks at me and goes, "Is that where you used to go?" Now, my dad and I had beer there.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
it was one of those moments where I made a calculus. I just figured, like, is the truth helpful?
Yeah.
So I'm like, you know what, Paul? Because I'm a
I think
Catholic.
I've heard of it. I've heard of it before. I don't know if I've
Yeah.
been there.
Well, I have Catholic guilt. So years later, I did tell her because I try to be a good son, but in real time, I thought, oh, this is no one is
Yeah.
helped by this.
Yeah.
So you have this thing where like Theoclymenus says all this stuff and she's suspicious. Anyway, that's my subtle point.
That's
What's
good.
yours?
That's good. I like that. Yeah, and I want to say a little more about Theoclymenus at the end, but not much because I have him down as my lingering question. I'm so interested in him. He's such an
Me
interesting
too.
point in this story. He's one of those characters. Someone should do one of those. Those Marvel movies go on and on. They spin off characters and spin off characters. This is a legitimate spin off character. He should have his own book.
Yeah. I love that idea.
It's a great one.
Theoclymenus fan fiction.
Yeah, it probably exists.
There's a weird nerdy market for this. I swear to you.
Yeah. I bet there is like some dark web, website somewhere where they're just writing out Theoclymenus stories. But you can see how they got there. Well, for my subtle point, and I think this is the thing that's being teased out that Odysseus is going for, and it's not to be missed, which is that the suitors are bad guys. All right. There is a level at which, and the suitors, I think it's back in book 3 or 4, I can't remember. The suitors make a really good case for themselves. They actually do. If you're trying to see things from their side,
yeah.
There are several places where they make a really good case for themselves, and they say something like, "Listen, your dad's been gone all this time, 20 years. Look, he's just leaving things in limbo. Your mom's a wreck. She's not coming through. We're not making any decisions. Listen, we need resolution. We need to move forward. This is the way things work. She needs to marry someone. We need to move forward." I mean, Athena says kind of a version of that to Telemachus to get him out and about. So when Antinous says those things, he says, "We're not going anywhere until your mom makes a choice." There, you can kind of get sucked in to that side. And so there is a way to either you can just ignore it and just go along with it and say, "Oh yes, the suitors are the bad guys," and not really think about it. Or you can kind of think about it and see, well, they kind of have a point. But what happens in this chapter is that Odysseus craftily works to make it clear. And I think he's making it clear to the reader. He's making it clear. So if you're looking outside of the story, it sort of makes it clear to the reader that what these guys are going to get, they really deserve. But inside the story, Odysseus is finding out. He's testing them. He's poking, he's prodding to find out exactly what's going on here. And he finds out via Antinous primarily, that these guys are awful. They're really, what they're doing here is really, really bad. And where you see it is Odysseus comes in. He doesn't just go to the door and beg generically. He wanders through the room and goes man for man, trying to get food and see who's going to be generous enough. And here's the point: generous enough not to give Odysseus some of their own food, but to give Odysseus some of the food that they took from another guy. And so Antinous is such a bad guy. And this is in this scene where Antinous refuses to give to Odysseus anything but throwing a stool at him. Odysseus and Odysseus calls down a curse on him. Odysseus says, listen, what you've done here is really, really awful because of this. And I was going to read the lines on page 326. He says to him, one thing I have to say, Odysseus says, there's no pain, there's no burden for the heart when blows come to a man and he's defending his own cattle, his own cows, his own lambs. But here it was otherwise. Antinous hit me for being driven on by hunger. How many bitter seas men have crossed for hunger? If beggars enter the gods, if there are furies pent in the dark to avenge a poor man's wrong, then may Antinous meet his death before his wedding day.
Right.
And
pretty clear.
Yeah. So Odysseus points out that Antinous is inhuman, essentially, that he doesn't recognize that hunger, starvation, food, is the need for food is one of the realities of life. And whenever you see another human who's hungry and you somehow find a way to blame them and not give them stuff that you've taken, it doesn't even come out of your own pocket. But you
Can
want
I
to give
throw something in, Paul? Or I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I throw
then he's
something
awful. No, that's it. That's all I want to say is that then Antinous is really, really bad. He's deeply broken in his character. He's a completely inhuman person, I think, is the most generic way you can say it. He cannot sympathize with, he cannot identify with a person who doesn't want fame or glory or wealth or sensuality or something like that. He just wants a meal. He just wants food. So he's awful. He's bad.
Yeah, and I just want to that's really good, and I want to dovetail off that and just say that I think the difference between reading a work of literature and having this conversation versus a work of ethics or philosophy is works of literature craft their own universes where good and evil are defined with nuanced differences, even within I don't know, even between the Iliad and the Odyssey, I feel that there are some differences. And even within different Shakespeare plays, there are some differences. So I think what you're saying is totally true, even if you were deriving ethics just from the Odyssey. And the Odyssey is so clear for so many chapters about what a good person is, what a good man is, unfortunately. Like hospitality is the province of men because men own all the things. And Odysseus is a stranger. He's a Xenos. He's a stranger.
Right.
And the way they're supposed to treat him has been completely clarified inside the Odyssey.
Right.
And when he returns to his own house, and I go back to that student I had, Jacob, last year, who wrote this really great paper on how it seems like a weird characteristic of Ithaca, as opposed to all the other places we visited, is that they're really good to slaves. Like Odysseus's father bought Eurycleia, but never slept with her and actually treated her respectfully.
Right.
And Eumaeus clearly feels like he's loyal and has been treated respectfully. But you don't see that everywhere in the Odyssey. So it seems like Ithaca has been a place historically that has lived by Xenia. And that Xenia is a very specific ethic. It's a specific Homeric ethic. Yeah. And it is, like you're saying, Antinous flips it on its head. And we see this with Beowulf. The ethics of Beowulf are generosity as being a part of a good king.
Yes,
why are dragons bad? Because dragons hoard. They're the opposite of a good king. So the way to create a great villain is to clarify what goodness is inside the book.
Yes. And it can be almost anything. But the Odyssey makes it very, very clear and goes to great depth.
Yeah, exactly. And I think to take pressure off of students, I think we can have personal reactions, and I want to
Yeah.
honor that. If a student has a personal reaction, I think that shows they're connecting, and I don't want to dissuade them
Yeah.
from that. But I
Right.
want to push them and ask, okay, that's your reaction in 2024 in Massachusetts. Inside the world of the poem, what would bother, if you were in the room here, what would bother you?
Yeah.
And I
Right.
just think that sort of imaginative transportation makes for really dynamic reading,
Yes,
as
it
opposed to
does.
just looking for. I think sometimes you and I aren't doing this now, but I'm just throwing this out there for
Yeah,
teachers
sure.
that are listening. We can make these books into like very trite ethical handbooks, and they're just way more cool than that. I mean, there's so much
Yeah.
else happening here, and
Yeah.
there is ethics here, but I would just say that the way to make that dynamic is to ask, what's the ethics of the Odyssey? Because it's not the
Right.
ethics of the New Testament or Old Testament or Descartes
No.
or go down the line. Like, this
Right.
is very specific to the way people treat each other in this universe. And that makes it, we're just kind of honoring this book that way rather
Yes.
than generalizing what goodness is. Again, you're not doing that. I'm just kind of digging a little.
No, I gotcha. No, it's good. And I think what I like, what keeps me coming back to, I agree with what you're saying, but I like the challenge also of asking students at some level, can you figure out the ethics of the Odyssey? And does it seem like ethics, not just the Odyssey ethics, but does it seem like they've landed on something that seems true to you? Like,
Yeah.
make a judgment, make an ethical, moral judgment yourself.
Yeah.
Does this seem right? And Odysseus, or the Odyssey, takes things pretty far. Apparently, Antinous has forfeited the right to live based on his lack of Xenia, and maybe that's too far. But I think Odysseus shows him, and it's so brilliant because it's in a tiny way. What they're doing is kind of a big thing. It's sort of an overthrowing of a kingdom. It's a mutiny or some kind of almost violent, rebellious overthrow. But you don't see it in that first. You see it in this tiny moment where a guy just walks up with a bag and says, "Do you have a scrap of bread for me?" And that's where it's shown. Where Odysseus says, "Oh, get this guy out of here." I love his response to the passage you read, where Odysseus gives this long story. "Oh, come on, man. I used to be wealthy. I know what it's like." And the guy's like, "Oh, can someone shut this guy up and get him out of here? Why am I listening to this?" He just has no time for it. So in that, that sort of classic, nothing human is alien to me kind of, expression of humanity. Something very human is alien to Antinous, and so he is like a psychopath or something. He's presented as one of the people who can't live in society anymore.
Yeah, and I just want to say that I think there's something very universal though and very human. I'm not tooting my own horn because I think a lot of us do this, but do you remember Mario at our school, the custodian?
Yeah, I remember his son was in the school whenever I was there. His son was a student.
That's right. Mario and Jim are two custodians at the school Paul and I worked at together.
Yeah.
They're two of the best guys ever. Yeah. So here's my point. The Iliad,
if I could just interrupt you, as proof of how good they were, I think you and I broke the coffee machine several times. We had the little pod machine, and instead of putting pods, we had the reusable one, and we kept breaking it. Mario would always bring us a new one, and never really complained.
But anyway, I mentioned the custodians at my school for this reason. You read the Iliad and the Odyssey, you can get tricked into thinking it's about gods and heroes, and it is. But weirdly, what a good person is actually, I think, in a more substantive way, defined by how we treat people who cannot benefit us.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really interesting thing in a universe that seems to be about gods and immortality and glory and heroes, which it is. And I think I look at my school, which, we think about our mission statement and the values and whatever. But at the end of the day, if custodians come into my room to say, drop off some books for me, how I treat them in the room as a teacher with a tie on and a master's degree, and they haven't had, frankly, bluntly, they haven't been as lucky as me. So they have this job. But it's equally important. Good custodians are gold, and all of us adults listening to this know that. Take away good custodians in the workplace. Talk to me how the workplace is.
Right.
So I value very much, as do you, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anybody that works hard. Anybody. And I
Right.
think there's something Homeric
Mm-hmm.
about anytime any of us listening to this honor those we work with who can't benefit us. Like
Yeah.
us being nice to them or not gets us nothing. And I think
Yeah.
Homer's wisdom is largely rooted in knowing that.
Yeah.
If I can
Yeah.
say that.
And there's a level deeper, I think, or an additional level that goes with it. Look at Eumaeus. He is an
Yes.
exemplary. Well, he's an example of that thing of the very line he says that slavery takes half humanity from you, and you're unable, as I mentioned before, as a slave to self rule, to
Yep.
give yourself rule, to guide yourself. Look at Eumaeus, though. He's completely capable. He
Yep.
is as diligent as he would be if that whole kingdom belonged to him. So Odysseus has
Paul,
that.
he's the best human being. He's the best example of a good Greek in the entire Homeric universe.
Yeah, he's uncomplicated. You really like Odysseus, and I really want to make him work, but he's got some there's some speed bumps along the way, some potholes in trying to make him work. But Eumaeus isn't that way. So that means that janitor, there's nothing paternalistic in it at all.
No.
There's nothing like self-meritorious because somehow in Eumaeus you see that he is completely treated with actual legitimate hospitality in the sense that he self-rules. He's independent, he's smart, he's witty, all on his own. And that's something you have to at the very least allow people. And if you're just kind of in speech only, honoring, someone else, then, you can still be in control and still kind of subjugate them. And it just looks, if Eumaeus is any example, it looks like Odysseus or Ithaca more broadly, as you're saying, is a place where that can happen. And Eumaeus is a great example of it. He stands in stark contrast to the other things you see. So you see what's possible. He's not Argos. He's not the other, younger generation of noblemen. He's not Melantho or Melanthios, the cattle herd. There's real potential here, to fight for, because it's special. Like you were saying, or like your student wrote in that paper, it's special over here in Ithaca. It's worth digging deep for.
Yeah.
So, all right. So that's probably enough. That's probably enough on that. So we've got the obvious, we've got the subtle, our lingering stuff. I kind of outed myself.
Go ahead.
On that, Theoclymenos is my lingering kind of puzzlement. I really like him. He adds drama. It's kind of a dumb question in a way because it doesn't really necessarily need an answer, but I ask it anyway. Why is he here? Why?
Yeah.
How did he come to be in the book? And why is he in the book? It's such an oddball throw in. And I've made up some explanations that I like, over the years from time to time. Like I like the test of Telemachus's judgment that Theoclymenos is in that moment where he has to make a snap judgment. It's the kind of thing that if you get wrong, you die. And then I also like the drama that he adds, but in that way, he's kind of a literary device. And I guess I'm not used to finding things in the book that are like obviously literary devices. I want to think of him as something, as something more. And I don't know what that is, honestly.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. No,
so
I love
I'm
it.
landed
I love
on
it
him
too, and I haven't figured it out yet. Exactly what you were saying. To a large extent, I feel like you that he's a test of how Telemachus has grown up. I also think he highlights, and we may have discussed this in a different chapter. He highlights that Xenia is more than being nice. Ethics is not being nice. It shows that actual adult goodness often involves literal danger.
Yeah.
That if you're really going to be there for human beings, you can't, know everything about them before you're good to them, and there's a risk. If you're going to do the will of Zeus, you sometimes have to risk your life, and that has to be a choice. And I think he's there as a murderer, prophet, exile to demonstrate the danger of what they're expected to do.
It's just a wonder as just plotting. I just can't get over it. I mean, that he's thrown in here. I mean, I don't want to, get, make too much of it. I don't want to sound ridiculous.
It's great. I'm with you 100%.
But he's amazing. It's amazing. He's not done yet, folks. I mean, he keeps showing up, and he keeps popping up to just kind of screw up, everything. And, and almost does. So he's a little wonder, amazing little piece. So that's what I have. Did you have something else for the
I
lingering?
did. I have a weird one. So again,
Awesome.
I recently finished reading the Iliad, and the Iliad either ends with people sleeping or people killing each other. I'm fascinated by how chapters end. And you had alluded
Okay.
to this earlier. In the Wilson, the last two lines are,
Yeah.
"It's already late past afternoon. Music and dancing entertain the suitors." I want to mention the suitors are people that Odysseus patently hates because they're using his stuff. They're disobeying Xenia. They're taunting his wife. They're plotting to kill his son. And then above and beyond that, I want to mention that the people dancing for the folks that Odysseus hates, those
Yeah.
people are property of Odysseus.
Hmm.
They're not hiring out a dance company. Those dancers are people, I guarantee you, it's not a
Yeah.
dance studio locally that, yuppie moms send their kids to. These
No.
are things. These are property.
Right.
Right. So it's another example of the suitors using Odysseus's stuff. And the fact that the chapter ends with that is a sign that we are very far away from this epic ending. That Odysseus is literally physically in his palace right now, but the way things are, his women that he owns are dancing for the people he hates the most in front of his eyes. He is so far away from being done. It's actually brilliant. It's a brilliant little last image. It really is.
That's right. That's right. If you can picture it, should just be filmed like a little short, just the end of this chapter, and to see that, and then just the camera pans back over to his face, and it would take some kind of great actor who's probably long dead to express all of the feelings of control, of contempt, of hatred, of hurt, all those things at once in one little facial expression, as the music fades out and the screen goes to black. But you're right, it's all happening right there in front of his face, and it's amazing. And then also, just again, back to the plot thing, how's he going to fix this? It's impossible. It is like, if you were writing this and sort of workshopping this in class, I think your writing teacher, your fiction writing teacher would say, you've just written yourself into a corner. There's no way out of this. I don't see how you're getting out of this. You can't fix it. So you might need to rewrite it.
On your team are a guy that takes care of pigs who's 0-0 in lifetime fights, and a kid who's taken one field trip and is 0-0 in lifetime fights. That's your team. And you have 100. What is it? 108 suitors.
Yeah, I think it's 108. Yeah, I've tried to count them up over the years. I always with that.
That being said, that's a good conversation. Like you could say that, and then you could say what in the epic so far gives you the sense that this might work, and kids could probably figure out Odysseus' strategy in book 9, whatever. I like once I'm about halfway through with a book like this to ask those like predicting questions, because then when they're reading, they're looking to see if their predictions come true, and it's like a good reading.
Yeah. Write them down. Write it down on the margin. Put yourself out there. Commit yourself to a prediction, and then see what happens.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think that brings us here to the end of this book 17 fairly well. I think a decent overview, and then drilling in it in our normal ways, with obvious, with subtle, with sort of lingering significant points. I think we've covered it well. There's a lot more in here. There's a ton more we could say. You could do this episode all over and not really repeat ourselves, I think.
100%.
For several other things. And I would say Penelope, is a place to go. Don't miss the Penelope parts, which we kind of did. But she's fantastic in this, and and is emerging more and more. Penelope the Wise, as she's called in my translation here in this chapter. All right, Beggar at the Manor. That's Odysseus. It's build up. It's restraint. It's it's the desire to punish now is even greater than ever. With Odysseus. So we'll see if you can pull it off in 7 more books.
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, sounds good, Jay. Thanks a ton. Good chatting.
Yeah, good to see you, Paul.